Ladies and gents, welcome back. Now, I'm a big fan of Alfred Hitchcock movies, and they always come with a twist at the end. So if you're a fan, stick around to the end. Justin Trudeau just revoked the Emergencies Act, the War Measures Act, and he's coming under pressure now for this. Facing financial peril and pending Senate rebuke, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau revokes Emergency War Measures Act. In the bigger picture, the Canadian banking and financial system was hit hard by the deployment of Emergencies Act, which highlighted the ability of the government to arbitrarily freeze and seize money, assets, and financial instruments, capital, without any due process. There are also strong rumors in the financial sector that in addition to Canadians removing their money from the banking system, previous investment funds from Hong Kong have been moved. And making matters even worse, digital currency exchanges were no longer offering services in Canada. Simultaneous to the mounting domestic and international backlash against the financial system, the Canadian state was likely to rebuke the government of Justin Trudeau and not support the invocation of the Emergency War Measures Act against Canadian citizens. As a result of multiple issues of backlash with severe consequences, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet are trying to save face and walk back from Emergency War Measures Act by revoking it before they faced humiliation of a public defeat in the Canadian Senate.
We were very clear that the use of the Emergencies Act would be limited in time. And today, after careful consideration, we're ready to confirm that the situation is no longer an emergency. Therefore, the federal government will be ending the use of the Emergencies Act.
Now, this is an about face from his position not but 24 hours prior, saying that it was in fact an emergency and remained an emergency until something happened. He had this emergency conference to revoke the emergency. More on this. Jordan Peterson was talking with Rex Murphy, who's a prominent political pundit for as long as I remember. And there was two particular statements in his interview that Jordan brought up that I thought were of particular note.
Well, we want to figure out, well, why did the truckers get demonized, and what are Canadians supposed to think about that, especially because FinTrack, which tracks financial transactions and is supposed to be taking care of such things as terrorist financing, has no evidence of suspicious transactions occurring in relationship to this protest, and that's was documented by CTV, who is hardly, you could hardly accuse of being sympathetic to the truckers. So there's that. Then there's just exactly what is the emergency here, and why is it reasonable under any conditions whatsoever to consider this an emergency of such major proportions that our basic civil liberties have to be lifted. Then the ability to freeze and seize bank accounts, which generates distrust in the banks. The precedent to define retroactive crime, because now funding a perfectly legal protest through legal means has been criminalized and associated with terrorism and organized crime, and can be punished without trial by fiat, and that appears to be permanent. Then we have the extension and redefinition of crime, because mischief has now been expanded as a category to arrest people without cause, and now you can aid and abet mischief. And then they compelled the tow truck operators to start operating, and Trudeau said they would get just compensation. And then you've been beating this drum for a long time. We've been governed essentially without Parliament for 2 years, and then this is it's very hard to say what the worst thing is that happened to Canada in the last 2 weeks, because 6 things are worse, and each of them should be fatal to the Trudeau government. But I think perhaps the worst was the decision to suspend Parliament on Friday from discussing the Emergency Act because of the action that was instituted by the police as a consequence of the Emergency Act.
So there's a phenomenon known as regime uncertainty that takes place in markets when governments take heavy-handed measures against their citizenry, notably like in cases like Venezuela, where the government began nationalizing some of the resources. What happened was a lot of the investors started pulling their money out immediately, and it created a giant drain. The idea of regime uncertainty is a phenomena in investment markets where people are uncertain if they're ever going to get their investment back, if it's just going to be seized by the state. Here we have James Mayville getting on Twitter saying, what the hell is happening in the Canadian banks right now, showing outage reports spiking all over the place. And more stories. Did Justin Trudeau's financial crackdown really spark a bank run in Canada? Now let's get to more that Jordan Peterson had to say on the subject of having money in bank accounts in Canada.
So this morning, I don't know what to make of all of this because it's happening so quickly. I can't believe the state to which the country is degenerated. I've been in contact with a reliable source within the Canadian military, and he told me today by email that if I had any sense, I'd take my money out of the Canadian banks because the situation is far worse than I've been informed. And so that's just one of many such messages I receive on a daily basis. So let's talk about the banks. So here's what our Prime Minister did last week. He permanently destroyed 20% of the population's faith in the entire Canadian banking system and stained the Canadian banking system's international reputation, I would say, for decades. And in any normal time, that in itself would have been enough to constitute sufficient grounds for a non-confidence vote for the government to be ousted. And that's only one of like the 7 things that happened last week that are of that magnitude. You can't even keep up with them. And so let's talk about this emergency for a minute. So yeah, he continues and goes on. I'm going to put a link to this discussion in the description down below. You can watch it in its entirety. Now, getting back to that article, this is where things begin to get interesting. After his prepared remarks about the reversal of the position, Trudeau was softly questioned. Now that's the press really drilling hard, but yeah, he was softly questioned about internal documents discovered by the Canadian Senate that point towards Trudeau's cabinet discussing the political benefits they would gain by invoking the Emergencies Act. Now that's a serious accusation. The Prime Minister dodged the questions twice, instead saying parliamentary investigation will review the Emergency Act was needed. Keep an eye on the story of the Senate discovery. From all indications, even the Liberal allies of Trudeau in the Senate were unable to support the Emergencies Act after they reviewed the non-public documents. There's something very damaging in those documents, likely internal emails between Trudeau and his various ministers. Now, that might be damning for the Trudeau government, his entire cabinet right there. So I'm going to keep grilling on this one because I know stories are going elsewhere and people are going to be paying attention to what's going on in Ukraine right now. I'm going to be reporting on that. I've already reported on that earlier today, but I will be paying attention to what's happening with these apparent internal emails that are damning information that the Senate has reviewed non-publicly. So as soon as that information is available, I'll be giving that to you all you folks via this channel. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when those videos come out. And as always, keep on trucking.